I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Well, hello, my friends.
How are you?
Well,
Yeah.
the world is going to shit, but I have nothing to complain about. I am here and safe and, feeling the heaviness and the energy of what's happening around me, but happy to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's always good to see your face, and I'm glad that we can always jump on when there's some major current events that are going on so that we can talk about it. And my thing was, I woke up this morning to my 19-year-old young person telling me, "Yo, mom, Donald Trump bombed Iran." And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me? Is this a joke?" And she's like, "Not a joke." And I'm like, I mean, I know that I'm not connected to any of the news or what he's doing until somebody else tells me what's going on. And so I was shocked. And I'm also curious as to how and why. Now I understand that Israel has been having issues with Iran and having some requirements of Iran. But I don't understand why the US has interfered. Yeah, so let me know. I see the shake in the head. So Wagwan, what is this? What is this about?
Well, I want to start by saying I'm not an expert on any stretch of the imagination, but I have been spending most of today listening to voices and reading and trying to get a full scope so that I can bring at least some semblance of understanding to the conversation. So I just want to start by saying that, not an expert, but what I know is that Israel started this fight with Iran. I mean, there have been decades and decades of contention between Iran as a Muslim country, as an Arab country. It is one of the countries that the US likes to demonize and boogeyman and do all of the things. So, we've been hearing about Iran and their potential nuclear arsenal for decades. As long as I have been in consciousness of listening to the news, I have heard that Iran is close to having nuclear weapons. That's the narrative. And so Israel, in its infinite wisdom, I'm saying with sarcasm, deep sarcasm, decided to bomb Iran. Just the most recent iteration of their bomb, because they've been bombing Iran and Yemen and Jordan and all kinds of different places. But this particular attack in the past week was, by their narrative, a preemptive strike, because the narrative has always been that Iran wants Israel wiped off the map, and that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, the first thing they're going to nuke is Israel, and that's why we all have to fight about this. That's the narrative in a very small nutshell.
Right.
And so they bombed them within this past week. They bombed them specifically, targeting military bases, but of course, many civilians have been killed in the process. And Iran, as they would be expected to do, has retaliated in firing at Israel, which quite a few of those bombs have met their targets, have gotten past Israel's infinite Iron Dome and have made their mark, although the casualty number for Israel is much, 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 much lower. Last I heard, less than 30 in Israel versus the, I think it's in the hundreds now, death toll in Iran. So we're still not comparing apples to apples when we're talking about impact of these aggressions between each. And so then last night in Trump's show of I'm the biggest dick in the room, he decided to bomb Iran. He bombed 3 major, what he's calling nuclear sites in Iran. And he had to do this. One in particular I know is deep enough in a mountain that he had to use bunker buster bombs, of which we've been hearing about. If you've been paying any attention to the military industrial complex in the past, 10 years, these bunker buster bombs are these really massive bombs that only the US has, apparently, that can penetrate an underground facility like this one. I think it was Formose, but I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, in Iran. And so he made a big deal out of it, did a whole Truth Social post last night. We had 125 planes involved in this. Several of them, if like maybe half of them at least, maybe were like decoys, and the others were the ones who were actually going to hit the targets. And yay USA, Iran bad. So it's fun. It's interesting because my daughter, my 27-year-old, texted me last night at about 10 o'clock and said, we're at war.
Mm-hmm.
And, my young person has anxiety. She has things that she deals with. And so I'm always very mindful of how I respond when she comes to me with these statements. And I started to text a big thing to try to protect her anxiety. And then I said, you know what? I just answered her back. I said, sweetie, we've been at war the entire time you've been alive and longer. And that was all I could say, because it's just, this is not new. This playbook is the same. It's the same as what got us into the Iran-Iraq war way back in the day. It's the same as what happened after 9/11. All of it is the same. So I was thinking, when we were talking about getting on today, I was thinking a lot about manufactured consent, and I'm hearing a lot about, especially I dabbled into the Sunday morning news shows to try to see like what was being said, and I've been checking different sites out to try to see. And the interesting narrative that's been pushed by JD Vance, the vice president, and others, is that they were targeting Iran's nuclear program, not Iran. And so I just want to put that out there as a red flag to anyone that's listening to that narrative, that is exactly what manufactured consent is. First of all, it's gaslighting, because it's like, okay, I didn't strike as if to create a war. I struck because I just wanted to keep us all safe by dismantling their nuclear sites, which they, by the way, knew was coming and had cleaned out the sites of all of the things, all the personnel and the important stuff before they got hit. So they didn't really get the things that they thought they wanted to get. So anyway, I've said a lot. I'll stop talking. I'll be curious at your response.
So some of the things that came up for me was, why is the US getting involved in the first place? Another thing that has come up for me is thinking about the bullying tactics of Donald Trump and really creating a militarized nation, like putting the forefront of militarization in his administration, right? With his several type of bullying tactics. I was reading in the Washington Post that anybody that is working on diplomacy, specifically with Iran, since 1967 or something like that, has been very sensitive in how they maneuver diplomacy. And I understand that the past 2 weeks, Donald Trump has been speaking to how he wanted to deal with, or what his expectations were with Iran. But I'm still trying to understand, and I don't know if you've heard, like, why is it that the U.S. is getting involved, other than our relationship again to Israel, and really participating, and that speaks to a lot, like really participating in the annihilation and destruction of people on that side of the world in a way that is reminiscent of like Manifest Destiny, of like, we are just taking over, we are just going in, and we are just going to do. The other thing that I am very curious about is something that I was reading. Yes, they're talking about nuclear weapons, but what I understand is that these plants are producing some type of material that is also used for other things other than nuclear weapons, right? So now you're also cutting off what these materials are used for, just like in everyday living life stuff. So you're saying that it's just about nuclear weapons, but I'm also, to your point about the consent, are you using that as a narrative space to be able to go in and continue to bomb? And then I'm also curious, is this conflict between Israel and Iran, I don't know where it stems from. Does it stem from like having different faith bases? Does it have something to do with geography? Is it also a part of like capitalism, where if you get this area of the world and you get to control and have power over this area of the world, then that gives you a different positionality and what you can do, what you have power, what you can control. So I'm curious about all of those elements in this fight, and like what what the benefits are, but I'm really concerned and curious about what the benefit of the U.S. becoming a part of this conflict, and then what the threat is to U.S. civilians or just movement across the world when there's these conflicts that are coming up and where people are sitting in their support spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, you said a lot there. So why is the U.S. getting involved? So what I'm learning is just that, it's the same reason that we've gotten involved in so many other, and the narrative is it's not about regime change, it's about stopping their nuclear weapon proliferation, which all of our intelligence sources that are proficient and experts in this area are saying that Iran is not developing nuclear weapons. Even our Secretary of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said just a couple of days ago, and has said it before, that Iran is not, there's no proof that Iran is making nuclear weapons. And although she changed her story this morning because Donald Trump has come out twice and said that she was wrong, so now she's pulling that back. So what's interesting in that is that Israel does have nuclear weapons. And we never hear about anybody's concern about that because
so Israel is,
huh?
So does the U.S. That's
right. So we never hear about that. So like just that nugget, just if you're listening to sound of my voice and you're hearing people say, well, Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons, we can't have them have nuclear weapons. Why? Israel's got nuclear weapons. We've got nuclear weapons. There are many countries out there that have nuclear weapons that don't use them on others. They have them as a source of,
or
the threat. It's a holdover kind of thing. Well, we can hit you back, so don't hit us first. And so I've been learning that the deeper dive into this, Iran must be a threat because is to your point about, is this religious base? Is it's racism. It's ethnicity. It's because it's an Arab controlled country. And so they are going to be more likely, when Israel is the country that's been decimating an entire group of people for 2 years, 76 years with our support and our unfettered access to bombs and money. They're the ones that they are aggressors, but the narrative is that Iran is this big boogeyman. And so I cannot imagine that there's any other reason for that, except that is a brown country, a Muslim country, and that is the boogeyman in our greater narrative in the U.S. I do also believe it's a distraction. I think Bibi is intentionally, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is intentionally bombing Iran because he wants to deflect from what's happening in Gaza, because they are still under a complete internet and power blackout. We are not hearing what's happening except drips and drabs. And what's been happening is that, especially in the past week or so, they've been allowing very, very, very small amounts of aid in for the millions of people that are starving. And then IOF officers, and I call them IOF because I believe they are the Israeli offensive forces, not the defensive. They have been sniping and picking off Palestinians as they are trying to get this small amount of aid that they're letting in the door. So because Bibi doesn't want us to know about any of that stuff, he's throwing a stone or saying, look at that shiny thing over there, and he decided to bomb Iran. Everything old is new again. We did the same thing, and I did a little bit of research that I want, because this goes back to the other narrative that we're hearing a lot about is he didn't get congressional approval. He didn't get a congressional approval.
That's what I wanted to know. Like, what's happening?
So, right. Yeah. So I looked it up. I did a little research. So the Declaration of War and the Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF. The United States has not used a formal congressional declaration of war since World War II. So if you think about all of the military conflicts that we've been involved in since World War II, none of those have been under a congressional driven declaration of war. So that's point number one. The AUMF is a shortcut around that. And you might remember Jay and I in our work with the previous organization that we worked for, Representative Barbara Lee was the sole person who did not vote for the authorized use of military force against Iraq back after 9/11 when we wanted to go in. So Iraq and Afghanistan. So And you'll remember that they manufactured weapons of mass destruction so that they could get the AUMF passed so that they could go into Iraq. So all of this is manipulative and calculated. But I propagated a list of examples in the past years of presidents who have used military force against other sovereign nations without congressional approval. It's an interesting list.
Okay, and as you speak, before you even go into that,
Yeah.
I also to remind everyone that there is no threat from Iran to the United States.
No.
So, like, even as
there is now.
well, there is actually now
Yeah.
For whatever that looks like, because the military powers are not
the same. Yeah.
The same. So whatever that looks like, because as Donald Trump has said, we can go in and continue to annihilate, and we will if you don't do what we want you to do.
Right.
And then also speaking about the organization that we used to be a part of, I saw a comment in the Washington Post article that he said there will be peace, but you are trying to get to peace through violence, war, bombing, and killing people. So that's how you are achieving peace.
Right.
And I'm thinking about any of the other folks who would move with that same type of behavior and action in trying to achieve peace. Yeah. They would be considered terrorists. They would be considered all kinds of other names. But because it's the U.S. nation that is going in and saying, we are driving peace in the way that we are driving peace through bombing and war. And the psychology of that is really throwing me off, like in a way.
One of my favorite, I used to have a sticker. I used to ride motorcycles, and on my helmet, I would put all these stickers. And I used to have a sticker that said, "Bombing for peace is like fucking for virginity."
That's it. That is it. If you want to break it down, makes no sense
because it just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. But this was an interesting list. So President Truman ordered U.S. forces into the Korean War without a declaration. President Reagan deployed troops to Grenada. And conducted military operations in Libya, among other places, without congressional authorization. President George H.W. Bush, so that was Bush Daddy, invaded Panama to oust Noriega, and he had deployed troops in the Persian Gulf region before seeking congressional authorization. Clinton ordered military intervention in Kosovo and conducted airstrikes in the Balkans, neither one that he did without a declaration of war. President George W. Bush, so Jr., as I like to call him, launched the Iraq War in 2003. He received authorization from Congress for the use of military force, but not a formal declaration of war. So that's the difference between a declaration of war and the AUMF that I mentioned before. Obama used airstrikes to support the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and initiated military action in Syria without clear congressional approval. Trump, in his first term, authorized military strikes in Syria and against Iranian-backed groups in Yemen and the Red Sea without seeking congressional declaration. And then Biden continued military strikes against Iran-backed groups in Yemen and the Red Sea without congressional declaration of war. I understand why people are fussing that he didn't talk to Congress first, but who are we kidding is my point. And this is not just Trump. This is, as you'll notice from that list, that is Democrats and Republican presidents that have used or have gone into other sovereign nations and bombed them either through the use of drones. Obama was famous for his use of drones to bomb other sovereign nations and the people within. So this is not just about Trump. This is a much longer militarization issue with the U.S. in terms of how we decide that we are going to go into another nation and bomb them into submission. As you stated, Iran does not have the same military capability to strike the U.S. Now, I have seen whispers about the false flags that they're starting to narrative around, where they're saying that Iran has brought they've smuggled some of their missiles and some of their faction groups inside the U.S. to start drumming up that manufacturer consent that, oh my God, if they can get their people, and I am not saying this, I'm just repeating the narrative. So please don't think I am saying that this is what's actually happening, but the narrative is that Iran is going to smuggle weapons into this country, into the U.S. territory, so that they can effect a strike, which further drums up that manufactured consent of the US people to be afraid that somebody's going to come into our backyards and set off a bomb. And so therefore we give them permission to keep bombing Iran. Now, what's interesting is Iran, the parliament of Iran voted unanimously today to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a 21 mile at its narrowest point strait. It's a channel from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and then its access out to the ocean. It is where 20% of the oil reserves come from that region and come through the Strait of Hormuz. So it is going to have a massive impact economically and capitalistically all around the world. Everybody's going to feel that because oil reserves are going to stop from that area because they won't be able to get through the strait. The Ayatollah has not, as last I checked before we started recording, has not confirmed that's the second step. The parliament has to vote on it, and then the Ayatollah makes the final decision. So Trump is blustering about that and saying, if you close the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to X, Y, and Z. But it's one way for them to affect an impact on the rest of the world, different from the capability of being able to fire missiles. So I'm not mad at them for that. And I've been also seeing people and have heard folks say to me on U.S. territory, well, Iran is so horrible to their people and their people don't want their leadership, and, which is all about regime change, which Trump keeps saying we're not about regime change. But my pushback is, are they really? Have you been hearing from the people of Iran that they're unhappy with the way that their country is run? And if they're unhappy, why does that give us the right to go in and bomb somebody because they're not doing it the way we would think they should? It just, yeah. So there's a deep dive to be had about the what he's doing, what Trump is doing is no different than any president that we've had in power for, well, I mean, I didn't see Carter on that list. That was the only one that I didn't see that used authorization of military force without congressional approval. So,
And let's explore what diplomacy would look like. Because I understand that there's been conversations at Geneva talks. I understand that people are trying to figure out how to, manage the conflicts that are occurring. And then all of a sudden, you know what I'm saying? Out of the blue, you just do this aggressive force that is like really violent and harmful. And then like where does that position the US as the bully that we are? It's not like change, to your point, on all of the presidents who continue to aggress other places. Yeah. In this moment, where we have Israel decimating an entire region and group of humans and bombing other places and thinking about this oil reserve, if the ultimate goal is to develop some control over this strait,
right,
be able to own oil in a different way, I'm at loss for words because I'm really trying to understand what is the reason that we are engaging in and sticking our foot in our neck where we definitely don't belong. And then as a sitting president, how does that create the safety that you're speaking to? Like you're doing this thing to create the narrative that you're doing this thing to create some form of safety. But if you are developing an entire nation of people who are going to want to protect themselves, that's the way that I want to talk about it, who are going to want to protect themselves from like this violent aggression, then where are we going forward to? We're not getting towards peace in the way
that's not the objective. Yeah. It's deflection. I mean, that's my personal opinion, is that this is all about deflection. This is all about furthering the victimization narrative of Israel. And of course, Trump, he moves through space always as this bloviating, blustering, puff up his chest with air, saying that, we're going to be bigger and better and stronger, and we will, blow you off the face of the earth because you're the boogeyman when we're the ones that hold all the power and all the, well, just as Israel does. I mean, Israel is a lot smaller, but what's the narrative that we always hear about Israel? They're the strongest military behind the U.S. They're the strongest military, you know, just short of the U.S. They are us. We are the ones. The U.S. is providing all of the weapons and all of the money and all of the coverage for Israel. So there is no diplomatic reason for any of this. There's no wanting peace. He's just using words to, my opinion, using words that will try to further that manufactured consent. But that hinges on making Iran the boogeyman and making Iran this entity that is out of control and only wants to rape and maim and pillage, and which they just want to live. They just want to live.
And be that alone, which is like what most people do, like just leave us alone.
Just leave us alone.
What I find fascinating also is like with these bullying tactics is that Donald Trump is not standing or addressing anybody who's actually a formidable, and no disrespect to Iran and all of the capacity.
No. Yeah. It's just about their actual numbers of military.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, you are just being a bully because you're not standing up to a power that actually has equal foothold as you do.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about that kind of thing, it is, I don't have the words because I'm also back to I told you so about this kind of like erratic person who is in leadership in like significant power throughout the world, and is like making these decisions, and then the alliances with Israel and pushing the agenda in this Middle Eastern area is really positioning the world to have more conflict and not more peace.
No, peace is not the objective. Never has been. Never has been. In other words, you know, it reminds me of the, you know, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz statement, as the wizard is trying to convince Dorothy and this Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion that he has all this power. It's all obfuscation. It's all deflection. And while I'm not trying to shortchange the real possibility that this could escalate, I mean, there is a real possibility that Trump's behavior could further escalate aggressions in that region in particular, but then also find itself on our soil. I mean, that's how we ended up with 9/11, quite honestly. You know, we had been building frustration, and that's a very light word for what it was feeling. The hijackers that caused 9/11 to happen had years and years and years of bullying from this country, had years and years and years of obfuscation. I'm not excusing what they did. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but there's a reason they got as angry as they got to pull off what they did on 9/11. There's always a reason. And it wasn't that we were just the victims and they were just the bad guys. There was underlying, and this, you know, anytime we're looking at this kind of action and this kind of aggression towards another group of humans who, as you stated, don't have the same, it's not apples to apples when we're talking about the military ability of these two entities. And again, I don't understand why people are so quick to buy the whole, well, Iran might get nuclear weapons when Israel's had them all along. Israel is the one that is oppressing and suppressing and ethnically cleansing the entire indigenous population of the land that they stole and that they're occupying. They are the ones that are doing all of the aggressing. They are the ones that bombed Iran first. They are the ones that bombed Yemen. They are the ones that bombed Lebanon, bombed Syria, I mean, that's all they've been doing for at least 2 years, much longer than that, but we've all been focusing on the past 2 years. And it's like, but we're going to be worried about Iran and their nuclear weapon. It just make sense.
It doesn't make sense. I'm going to go back to we are the ones, right? Because I'm not to separate ourselves from like Israel, since we are the ones that are
doing, yes,
giving the support to Israel in the way that they'd be able to aggress the Middle East in the way that they're doing. And all of that kind of stuff is, I keep on getting a loss for words, but I wanted to ask, because I am not on U.S. territory, not
Right.
on U.S. soil.
Right.
I know that all of this is happening. So I am curious about like how are people responding and reacting to it? As a white identified female person, what is the demographic of folks? Like what can what can be done in this moment, right? To show that we are not in support of this continued violation to people in the Middle East and causing more risk and threat to our lives or, on US territory. So what does that look like?
I mean, I know that a lot of people are in the streets in a lot of major cities across the country today. There are many actions that have come across my feed and algorithm and in my all of the different channels that I get information from, letters to be written, calls to be made to my congressional members saying we are not okay with a war with Iran, which, you know, I even question what that is because I don't think of it as a war. When we're the only aggressor, they're just trying to survive. I don't see it as war. But for the purposes of this conversation, that's what everyone's calling it. So, I think we stay the course. This is what I'm doing. I'm staying the course in terms of communicating with my elected officials to let them know that I'm not okay with this as their constituent. And that may mean being in the streets. That may mean calling and emailing. It may mean all of the above. But I'm also talking to everybody that'll listen, and that's part of the reason why we got together today to talk about this, is that, do your very best to not fall for the okey doke. Don't fall for the narrative. Do your Googles, do your reading. Try to get as many sources as you can to learn about what the narratives. Turn off the media on the TV because they're not going to give you that is a horribly biased, violent way of getting information. Either way, doesn't matter if it's Fox or MSNBC. It's all skewed, and know that this is not new. And we have to get to know our neighbors. We have to get. I mean, the other thing I think he's trying to deflect from is the ICE raids and the people that are in the streets. I just got finished taking a wonderful training with a friend of mine about what to do when ICE shows up at work, at your home, or at when you're in your car. So kind of like concrete ways of handling it if you come across that. And all of these things are happening. The militarization of our police force, the sicking of our National Guard onto U.S. citizens simply for expressing our First Amendment right. All of these things are happening, and I do believe that bombing Iran is just another way of deflecting from all of that, and taking.
But not deflecting, like as we're talking about, like this being a repetition of like historical things that have happened in red baiting. So now, are we going to start targeting, Iranian U.S. citizens, students that are in school, saying there's a threat to them, and then this whole ICE and like whole removal that has already started with one demographic of people and just like sweeping through the rest. This is like now creating another, we being the aggressors, but now creating another reason to say, oh, this might be a threat, and let's remove these people out of our community as well. So targeting these people in our communities as well. But we're the people who have put this out. So people to be thinking about, how they're setting up the narrative against anyone. I'm going to keep on saying, I'm going to repeat it every single time that we're on this call, that the U.S. was creating a white nation.
Yes.
What does that look like? So for the folks that are sitting around saying that this is not my fight, if you were a white identified human, that might be the thing. But like this is something that we all need to be thinking about. Like, is the U.S. supposed to be developing into a white nation?
Are they supposed to be? I think they are. I think and I'm only saying they. I realize I'm saying they, and I'm not. I am a white identified human, but I think the power structure that is also mostly white men, but also white women, believe that this country should be a white nation. And I challenge anybody that looks like me to be thinking about whether or not you're down for that. And if you're not, you need to be in the fight. So it's one or the other. And that's where I get frustrated with people that look like me that still say, "Oh, I don't get involved in politics. It's too divisive. I don't watch the news." Well, I'm happy they don't watch the news, except they need to educate themselves somewhere else. You know, you can't sit on the fence anymore. You are either okay with them turning this country into a white nation, and that means eliminating anyone else that's non-white, which is what they're actively doing right now, or you're not, and you get in the streets and you do what you need to do to be a part of the resistance. It's one or the other. You cannot sit on the fence anymore, especially if you are white.
And then what does a white nation look like, knowing that the US has such a diverse demographic of population? Right. So like so you're trying to remove all those people, you're trying to disappear them, are you trying to go back?
I doubt that. I'm sorry.
What does that look like? You know what I mean?
I doubt they will. I doubt it will be about eliminating all non-white people, because we'll just enslave the people that are still here. You know, that we need people to still do, because white people are inherently lazy. So we still need people to do all the work for us. So I don't think it's as much of taking everybody that's non-white out of the US, but it's actively it's recreating chattel slavery. It's recreating what was set up before, where white people were automatically free. They automatically had rights, or at least male landowners back in the day. And everybody else, was
Servitude to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't think they'll eliminate all, but they will eliminate. I think the disappearing of the non-white people is an act of force to create fear in the ones that are left behind. And if we think about how slavery worked in a lot of ways, there was fear and intimidation that was all a part of how a white slave owner could have themselves and 5 of their family on a plantation surrounded by 200 enslaved, and everybody went to sleep and survived that night, except the enslaved. The white people were fine. That was based on fear and intimidation. So I think this is all part of that soup, trying to recreate that fear and intimidation piece. When I was taking this ICE training earlier, the person that was conducting the training was saying, part of the reason why people are staying, people that might identify as a migrant, or even if they're an American citizen, but they look like a migrant, are staying in their homes because their homes are deemed private and they have some level of control. If they don't have to let ICE in their door. And as long as they keep that door closed and they do not let them in, it's very much like vampires. If anybody's seen Sinners, you have to invite them in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're staying in their homes because that's the only place. If they are in a public space, if they are out on the streets, if they're walking on the sidewalk, if they're in a park, if they're in a parking lot, all of these places are considered public, and which means they can be swept up at any time without a warrant. And so that starts that intimidation piece of making them stay in their homes, which means if they were working and they had a job, they lose their job because they can no longer go there. They then lose the capability of providing for their family and paying for their rent or their mortgage, and all, the trickle down that happens from that. So yeah, I think all of that groundwork is being laid. And so the bombing of a brown country is a don't pay attention to what we're doing here. Look at the shiny object over there, because they're the ones that are so dangerous. They're the ones that are going to hurt us. They want the annihilation of all of us, and they don't like us, and so therefore we need to be afraid of them. It's
they don't be amongst us, being our neighbors, living in our communities. And so that's another group of people that you can target.
Yes, the Islamophobia, I'm sure, is going to skyrocket now. Not that it wasn't already bad, but we're worried about our immigrant and migrant friends and neighbors, and now we also need to. Not now. We've always needed to worry about them, but we need to be focused on the group of people that would identify as Muslim or Arab, because now that Iran is the boogeyman again, they're going to start swiping them up too, or not start, but continue and maybe expand. It's already been happening.
And this is also like U.S. citizens with a specific ethnic background, like coming from Iran or any of those places, but then also U.S. citizens that like are traveling and can't get back in, or being held at borders, or being, they're having their phones looked at to see, whom they're communicating with and what their relationships are. But it really is becoming like an over surveilled existence that the U.S. is creating right now, and that
surveillance equipment has all been tested in Israel. That's what testing all of the surveillance equipment.
Israel has been a political project. Again, I've been saying it. Watch it and pay attention, because it's going to have an impact on you. Me being on the island of wood and water, being in Jamaica, we still are impacted by, our goods and our produce that have to come through Panama canals, and there's additional taxes and all of those type of things that are having a huge impact. So even if you aren't a part of it, these things that superpowers are doing are going to have some effect on where you are. So it is important to really be paying attention.
Yes, more will be revealed.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.